Many enterprises are finding that they have lost all control of their cloud and AI projects. How do you take back control? Let's talk about that. So welcome back to the Cloud Computing Insider. My name is Dave. Let's get started. So over the past 2 years, I've been focused on auditing projects that have hit roadblocks, AI projects and cloud projects. And before that, I spent 7 years as the Chief Cloud Strategy Officer at Deloitte, where I learned many things there as well. And I've also built and run my own consulting firm. So believe me, I've seen every angle on cloud computing projects and how to run projects successfully and how enterprises can leverage cloud computing to a successful end state. So first note that consulting firms are comprised of individuals, some good, some not so good. So you need to consider that. Ultimately, if people have a bad taste in their mouth around using a particular consulting firm, it's around an experience with a particular, partner individual who works at that firm. So keep in mind that you're going to get a variety of different quality of people that come out of these firms, and depending on who you work with, that's going to be your experience. So I'm not trying to, place blame on a particular firm versus another. That's just really, the human factors that are involved in this. So you need to ensure that you're dealing with other humans, understanding that you must protect yourself from hidden agendas, and that may not be as well understood. So ultimately, we're getting to the fact that in many cases, there's things that are said around the firm's marketing messages and things that actually happen behind the scenes. And there seems to be a disconnect with people understanding what those are. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is something fairly simple. Enterprises are looking to hire consulting companies that are able to take their cloud computing game and their AI game to the next level. And in essence, buying expertise that they don't have, so they can ensure success. That's what the enterprises are looking for. And obviously it's very expensive. You hire a consulting firm these days, certainly a big six consulting firm, they're going to charge a premium for their time and for their projects. And ultimately you need to ensure that you're getting value out of that investment. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So the reason I'm making this video, if you look closely at the past decade, and a half, has led to letting big consulting firms run cloud projects that have really created more pain than value. And that's really kind of my own assessment, and obviously looking at my own experiences, but also looking at the surveys and what people are doing out there, and also some of the value that we've actually gotten back from cloud computing versus what was promoted, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago. And obviously, cloud consulting firms, big consulting firms aren't the only actors there. There's small consulting firms, and many enterprises take a DIY approach and do it all themselves. And so there's plenty of blame to go around when you look at who's messing these projects up. But at the end of the day, I see a huge pattern in investments being made and in return being expected from cloud computing that really never showed up. And in 2025, we're dealing with that right now. We're doing repatriations, we're doing modernization of different systems, and we're looking at cloud infrastructure that was built over the past 15 years and cloud applications that were built over the past 15 years that are not getting anywhere near the value that they should be returning. Now, why is that happening? Well, I think largely a big part of it is going to be advice that didn't guide the enterprises correctly in looking at the use of cloud computing and the correct application of the technology, including which applications and data sets should be in the cloud and which should not be. And I think we've basically had a pattern of lots of different screw-ups, lots of different misinformation, and lots of different miscalculations in terms of how to leverage cloud effectively. And in many cases, this came from the big consulting firms. So why is this happening? Well, too often I see firms prioritizing their own partnership kickbacks with cloud vendors over the actual business goals of their clients, which is a shame. And I think I've seen this for the last 15 years. Large firms have built up very cozy and chummy relationships with the technology providers, the big cloud providers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and there's others in the space as well. And ultimately made decisions on behalf of the enterprises that are looking out for their financial interests more so than the enterprise's financial interests. So they become a sales arm for a technology versus providing you with key independent advisory as far as how you should be leveraging the technology correctly. And there's many architects out there and many consultants that take a very ethical approach to this and don't let these kind of partnerships sway their opinion. I'm one of them. However, many of them are not, and I'm finding that if enterprises are relying on the recommendations of a big consulting firm, that in many instances, they kind of align very conveniently with the partnerships that they've already set up. And so when you see something like going to a cloud conference or another technology conference, and a big consulting firm has gotten Partner of the Year, that doesn't necessarily mean a positive thing to me. That means that they've probably been able to sell more of that technology through their channels and through their projects than the other partners that are out there. Now, how many of those are going to be misapplication of the technology? You got to remember, when you look at architecture, we have 10,000 different permutations of technology we can leverage to solve the same problem, and they all work. And our ability to pick the technology that's going to bring the most optimized value back to the business is the objective there. However, if that objective is going to be, we're going to leverage whatever technology our partners are promoting because that's in our best financial interest, then you're not looking out for your enterprise clients. And that's my core bugaboo with this. So, and also enterprises, I think, have freely handed over control. So the more control you hand over through opaque contracts and ongoing procurements, the less you own your own cloud strategy. And so in many cases, they've outsourced their strategic direction, their use of cloud and now the use of AI to the big consulting firms. And so they have very smart people typically who are in these enterprises who are making many of the decisions. And by doing that, they're removing a lot of the value from the enterprise. If they're not able to make their own decisions independently, then they're going to be relying on other people to make it happen. And also the contracts that people are signing are very much, one direction. They're very much toward the benefit of the consulting firms and not toward the enterprise, including owning IP, property, things like that, ongoing, upselling relationships. These consulting firms try to do this land and expand thing where they, show up with 100 consultants and they try to increase that to 1,000, all these sorts of things which are based on these contracts being written in such a way which are fairly confusing. In many cases, the enterprises are good at what they do as an enterprise. They may be manufacturing tires or providing healthcare, things like that. They're not necessarily good with the technology and setting the technology strategy. So they're more than willing in many cases to sign the contracts that hands away the power of that strategy to another organization. I think that's a large mistake. So in order to get the best bang for the buck and spending money on large consulting out there, demand transparency from your consulting partners. Ask who they're partnering with and if any compensation is flowing behind the scenes. And you're going to get an unusual answer in that. They're going to tell you about the partnerships. And they're going to tell you about some sort of financial arrangement they have with a big cloud provider, big technology provider, where they both benefit from these projects. And then ask them how that's going to promote their independence in terms of picking the right technology for them. And that's a core problem that we're seeing in the industry right now. And it's continuing on with the AI stuff. Everybody has a partnership with NVIDIA. Everybody has a partnership with AI-related technologies that are out there. And in many instances, the technology providers are looking at the big consulting firms as a sales channel for their technology. And also in other instances, the consulting firms are looking for the technology providers as the ability to get leads on some of these large projects that are building up right now. These chummy relationships can be good or bad, but I think in many cases they promote a dependence and a bias toward the technology at hand versus a consulting architect, for AI and cloud, taking an independent look at the problem domain and picking the right technology. So demand transparency. What are you guys doing? How are you getting compensated? How is this affecting us? And see what kind of answers you get. So another trick is to tie consulting payments directly to delivering real, measurable business value, not just project milestones. In many cases, the consulting firms are going to look at this as risk because if they're having to deliver value, then that's going to put risk on the project. They rather just deliver some sort of an artifact, a PowerPoint presentation, architecture design, things like that. But their job's not going to be done in doing that. So your job is done as a consultant, and I explain this all the time to enterprises that are leveraging consultants, when they've delivered value to the business, when they've actually built the technology, designed the technology, and it has measurable and objective return on investments that they can prove and they can show you through metrics that you both agree upon. I can't stress that enough. And obviously, in some cases, that's going to be a deal breaker. The consulting firms won't approach deals when measurable value is going to be tied to the compensation because they view that as a lot of risk and they may leave those deals alone. But if that's the case, so be it. I'd rather you build up your own organization with your own talent and figure out how to deliver value yourself versus outsourcing it to a consulting organization that may or may not be able to deliver final enterprise value to you. And certainly if they're doing things like, only using a single technology provider, where they're using them no matter what the problem is, they're going to be missing the mark on value. And if you're allowing that to happen, make sure you're not paying them. So next would be requiring ongoing knowledge transfer. So don't let consultants hoard key expertise, key processes and tools in a black box. In other words, everything should be fully transparent to the clients. Everything I did when I delivered project deliverables was going to be exposed to the client in terms of how I got to this answer, why I'm picking this answer, proving the independence of thinking in terms of architectural frameworks that we're bringing forward. All these sorts of things are your property. You're in essence paying these folks to build IP, which is your intellectual property. And therefore, don't let them take that property back off site without revealing it to you. And in some cases, they allow these consulting firms to do it. Now, you have to, again, read the agreements and read the contracts. If the consulting firms are talking about work products and things like that are proprietary to them, and they're not going to be able to reveal it, and, yada, 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 legalese, say no. Say, hey, listen, look, you have to tell us everything you're doing. Show us your work and how you solve the problem. And that's going to be important to us, is not just having the solution, but how you got to the solution. So next would be review all existing contracts now, and don't be afraid to halt or renegotiate anything that elutes the control or insight of the project. So look at the contracts in detail. If they're already underway, that may be a bit of a problem, but in many instances, you can go back to your consulting partner and say, this really doesn't look fair to us. We'd like to renegotiate this aspect of the contract. And they're usually going to be open to do that because they want to have goodwill between you and them. But if you're seeing something that looks sketchy in the contract, make sure you have a lawyer look over it. Make sure you really kind of ask some of the core questions. And make sure you're signing the contracts that you feel good about. And I know with a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo in these things, and different kinds of resolutionary processes and procedures, things like that, they're tough to read. But let me tell you, everything kind of falls back to the contract. And if a relationship goes bad and goes south, in other words, they're doing stuff that you don't believe they should be doing, such as picking the wrong architecture and not returning value to the business, and it does get down into arbitration or it does get down into litigation, then you're protected if the contracts are written correctly. So make sure you engage lawyers and make sure the contracts are aligned to what your needs are and to the needs of the business. So next, be extra wary of so-called proprietary accelerators, hidden IP. These are often called, gimmicks, and they will lock you in to a particular, state or a particular path or a particular tool. Many of these consulting organizations, in order to set themselves apart, have created proprietary approaches, frameworks, things like that they view as unique to them. And they're going to consider that IP, and they're not going to turn that over to you. And so if you're using their tools and their processes, and they can't prove to you that you're able to take that IP back into your organization and use it even independent of the consulting firms being released, then that's going to be an issue. So watch for the gimmicks. I know they all have them now. They're kind of silly, I think, at the end of the day. I see them on a weekly basis and call them on it and tell them that if you're going to use that tool or use that framework, then we're going to have ownership of that. So set clear independent metrics for business outcomes and insist that all parties, internal or external, are accountable to them. So I can't stress this enough. So in other words, the metric should be we're returning value back to the business. How much value are you looking for? How much value can be promised? How much value is going to be reasonable? And everybody has to agree to these metrics and agree to, some sort of number in terms of how much value is going to be returned to the business. Now, in many cases, this is where that consulting firms will hit the eject button because they don't like those kind of deals because it causes risk to them. Because in many cases, you're able to withhold payment after they provide services because they're unable to leverage, live up to the metrics that we agreed upon. But I'd insist upon it. I always work with consulting organizations and my own clients that way. In other words, we're agreed upon what I'm doing there, how much I'm going to be compensated, and how much value is going to come back to the business. And I can't live up to that expectation, or if I can't make that goal, then I'm not going to get paid. I think it's perfectly fair. So at the end of the day, you should be building a cloud capability that belongs to your team, not renting expertise indefinitely. So I can't stress this enough. You want to make sure you have ownership of the work being done. In many cases, this stuff is done off-site. You don't see the people anymore since COVID. Everybody's working remotely. But you need to make it understood that any artifacts, any work product, anything that relates to value or services that were rendered for your particular enterprise needs to be owned by that enterprise. Can't stress that enough. So don't let people abscond your strategy. Take it off-site, take it into the domain of a consulting company, and take ownership of it that way. You're not going to have a situation that's going to end well. So anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments of this. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course my generative AI architecture course on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest book, An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. So until next week, stay very, very safe. Later.